So, two different studies, two different increases in type 2 diabetes relative to soft drink consumption. So what's in soft drinks? Well, in America, it's this stuff, right? High fructose corn syrup. Everybody's heard of it, right? It's been demonized, something awful. So much so that the corn refiners industry has launched a mega campaign to try to absolve high fructose corn syrup of any problems, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay? But the bottom line is, this is something we were never exposed to before, 1975, and currently we are consuming 63 pounds per person per year. Every one of us. 63 pounds of high fructose corn syrup.
That's American?
That's American, yes. Now, what is high fructose corn syrup? Well, you'll see in a minute. It's one glucose, one fructose. We'll talk about those at great length. One of the reasons we use high fructose corn syrup is because it's sweeter. So here's sucrose. This is cane or beet sugar, standard table sugar, you know, the white stuff. Okay? And we give that an index in sweetness of 100. So here's high fructose corn syrup. It's actually sweeter. It's about 120. So you should be able to use less, right? Wrong. We use just as much. In fact, we use more. So here's lab fructose over here, if you had crystalline fructose, and they're starting to put crystalline fructose into some of the soft drinks. You can, they're actually advertising it as a good thing. And that's got a sweetness of 173. So you should be able to cut that way back, right? They're not. Lactose down here, milk sugar, it's not sweet at all. Okay? And glucose, I should point out over here, is 74. It's not particularly sweet, and we're going to get to that at the end. Okay, and what goes on with glucose. All right? But anyway, there's why we use it. It's sweeter. It's also cheaper, as I'll show you. So here's high fructose corn syrup. One glucose, one fructose. Notice the glucose is a 6-membered ring. The fructose is a 5-membered ring. They are not the same. Believe me, they're not the same. That's what this whole talk is about, is how they're not the same. Okay? And here's sucrose, and they're just bound together by this ether linkage. We have this enzyme in our gut called sucrase. It kills that bond in 2 seconds flat, okay, and you absorb it. And basically, high fructose corn syrup, sucrose, it's a non-issue. It's a wash. They're the same. Okay? And they know that that they're the same, the soft drink companies and the corn refiners. Okay? But indeed, this is true. High fructose corn syrup and sucrose are exactly the same. They're both equally bad. Okay? They're both dangerous. They're both poison. Okay? I said it. So here's the secular trend in fructose consumption over the past 100 years. Before we had food processing, we used to get our fructose from fruits and vegetables. And if we did that, today we would consume about 15 grams per day of fructose. Not sugar, fructose. So sugar would be 30 grams, it would be double. Okay? We're just talking about fructose today. Okay? Prior to World War II, okay, before it got rationed again, okay, we were up to about 16 to 24, about 20 grams. So a small increase from the beginning of the century to World War II. Then, in 1977, just as high fructose corn syrup was hitting the market, we had increased that. We had basically doubled up to 37 grams per day, or 8% of total caloric intake. By 1994, we were up to 55 grams of the stuff per day. Remember, if you want to do sugar, then double the number. So that's 10.2. So you can see that more and more of our caloric intake, higher percentage, is being accounted for by sugar every single year. So it's not just that we're eating more. We're eating more sugar. Okay? And for adolescents today, we're up to almost 75 grams, 12% of total caloric intake. 25% of the adolescents today consume at least 15% of their calories from fructose alone. This is a disaster. An absolute unmitigated disaster. The fat's going down, the sugar is going up, and we're all getting sick. Trans fats, which are clearly a disaster, but those have been going down because we know that those are a problem. Now to the biochemistry. Okay? Now, how many of you here have taken biochemistry? Okay? So number one, fructose is 7 times more likely than glucose to do that Browning reaction, the advanced glycosylation end products. The thing that happens on your grill happens in your arteries for the same reason. Okay? You can actually see the color too, color change too. Fructose does not suppress the hunger hormone. There's a hormone that comes from your stomach called ghrelin you've heard about already. Okay? So when you if you preload a kid with a can of soda and then you let them loose at the fast food restaurant, do they eat more or do they eat less? They eat more. Acute fructose ingestion does not stimulate insulin because there's no receptor for fructose, no transporter for fructose on the beta cell that makes insulin. So the insulin doesn't go up. Well, if the insulin doesn't go up, then leptin doesn't go up. And if leptin doesn't go up, your brain doesn't see that you ate something. Therefore, you eat more. And finally, I'm going to show you liver hepatic fructose metabolism is completely different between fructose and glucose. Completely different. And I'm going to show you, before the day is out, the evening's out, that chronic fructose exposure alone, nothing else, causes this thing we call the metabolic syndrome. Everybody knows what the metabolic syndrome is? Okay, so this is the conglomerate of the following different phenomena. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, lipid problems, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. Okay, those all cluster together, okay, called metabolic syndrome. I'm going to show you how fructose does every one of those. I want to show you the difference between glucose and fructose in a way that will be glaringly apparent. So let's consume 120 calories in glucose. 2 slices of white bread. Okay? What happens to that 120 calories? Now, you eat the 120 calories, 96 or 80% of the total will be used by all the organs in the body. Okay? 80% off the table. Why? Because every cell in the body can use glucose. Every bacteria can use glucose. Every living thing on the face of the earth can use glucose because glucose is the energy of life. Okay? That's what we were supposed to eat. Okay? 24 of those calories, or 20%, will hit the liver. Okay? And that serves as a substrate for adipose deposition into your fat cell here, triglyceride. In addition, because the insulin went up in response to the glucose, your brain sees that signal, and it knows that that is supposed to shut off further eating. Okay? In other words, hey, I'm busy metabolizing my breakfast. I don't need lunch. Okay? And so you have a nice negative feedback loop between glucose consumption, the liver, the pancreas, and the brain to keep you in normal, negative, yin-yang energy balance. This is good. This is not dangerous. This is what's supposed to happen. All right, so now let's talk about a different carbohydrate. Let's talk about my favorite carbohydrate, maybe yours too. Okay? Ethanol. Ethanol is a carbohydrate, isn't it? Here's the structure. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's a carbohydrate. But we all know that ethanol is a toxin, right? A poison, right? You can wrap your Lamborghini around a tree, or you can fry your liver. Your choice. Depends on how much you drink and how often, right? Okay. So we know that ethanol is not good for you, except, of course, a little bit is good for you, right? So we can talk about that too later if you want. Okay? But let's talk about how it's bad for you. So here's acute ethanol exposure. Okay? CNS depression, vasodilatation, hypothermia, tachycardia, myocardial depression, pupillary responses, respiratory depression, diuresis, hypoglycemia, loss of fine motor control. You all went to college. Here's fructose. Nothing. Doesn't do any of those because the brain doesn't metabolize fructose. Okay? Alcohol gets metabolized in the brain to cause all of those things, but fructose doesn't. Okay? So fructose is not an acute toxin. Ethanol is. We control ethanol, don't we? Okay? We have something called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, right? We have all sorts of things. We tax ethanol. We do all sorts of things to limit consumption of ethanol. Okay? The Nordic countries, okay, all the liquor stores are state-run in an attempt to try to set the price of ethanol high enough so as to discourage consumption for public health reasons. We have 1,500 years of alcohol control policy in this world to draw on in terms of how to limit consumption. Got it? Okay? Because ethanol is a toxin and we know it. So let's consume 120 calories in ethanol. Shot of Maker's Mark. Anybody taste it? Yeah, good. Okay. So, 24 calories right off the top. Okay, the stomach and the intestine have something. Fructose is sweet. We like it a lot. Okay, we like it in everything. We like it in our bread. We like it in our pretzels. We like it everywhere we look. Okay? So let's consume 120 calories in sucrose, a glass of orange juice. Everybody got it? So 2 slices of white bread, a shot of Maker's Mark, a glass of orange juice. All the same 120 calories, but 3 different substrates. Let's see what happens to the fructose. So, number 1, the glucose, remember, because sucrose is half glucose, half fructose. So 60 of the calories of the 120 are glucose. 12 are going to make it into the liver, 48 out here for the rest of the body. Called hypertension. Okay, let me show you how. Because uric acid, turns out, blocks the enzyme in your blood vessels called endothelial nitric oxide synthase. And that's the enzyme that makes this stuff called nitric oxide, NO. And that is your endogenous blood pressure lowerer. That keeps your blood pressure low. So when you can't make it, your blood pressure goes up. So this just shows that fructose consumption increases gout in adults. Okay, so this is a study that came out last year showing that fructose consumption increases the risk for gout, showing that uric acid is going up. And this is a study done by our pediatric renal fellow, Stephanie Wynn, just published in Journal of Pediatrics. Okay, it's not submitted anymore, it's long in press. Okay, showing that this is in the NHANES database in the adolescents, showing that sugared sweetened beverages, as it goes up, your uric acid goes up. And not only does your uric acid go up, but here's your sugared sweetened beverages, and here's your systolic blood pressure going up. And here's a study done by Dan Feig at the University of Texas San Antonio, where he took obese adolescents with hypertension, and he gave them the drug allopurinol. And allopurinol is the drug that you treat gout with to lower the uric acid. And look what happened to the blood pressure. Systolic, diastolic, went down, showing that, in fact, uric acid is an important part of hypertension. We have a hypertension epidemic in this country. Here it is. It's the sugar. Okay, so far we have high blood pressure. Let's keep going. The fructose will get metabolized down to pyruvate. The pyruvate will enter the mitochondria just like before, throwing off a lot of citrate. Now here's a little trick that fructose does that glucose doesn't. Because these two can reform this stuff over here called fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, which can then reform with glyceraldehyde to form this guy over here called xylulose 5-phosphate. And I'll get to xylulose 5-phosphate in a moment. But I want to point out this asterisk. That's there to remind me to tell you something. That's there to remind me to tell you that this is why the sports drink companies put high fructose corn syrup in the sports drinks. Because if you are glycogen depleted, in other words, if you just ran a marathon, and you have no glycogen left in your liver because you burned it all, and you take in a sports drink with high fructose corn syrup, you can replete your glycogen faster than with glucose alone. That's true. So for elite athletes, a high fructose corn syrup containing sports drink actually makes sense. And so, indeed, sports drinks have high fructose corn syrup. The question is, who's drinking the sports drinks? Any elite athletes you know? Who's drinking the sports drinks? The kids, right? Why are they drinking it? Because it's cool, right? Because it's cool and it tastes good. Okay, so before we go on, I just want to now digress for a moment. Okay? 1967, University of Florida patents Gatorade. Everybody remember Gatorade? Okay. 1970, the Florida Gators win the NCAA championship in football. Gatorade makes a big splash. Okay? Big deal. Anybody ever taste the original Gatorade? Yeah? What did it taste like? Tasted horrible. Okay? It tasted like something that you might find, coming out of you instead of going into you. Okay? It tasted awful. Okay? 1992, Pepsi buys Gatorade. And they say, how are we going to market this swill? So what did they do? They added the high fructose corn syrup. Okay? So now who drinks it? Right, fat kids, right? Not even skinny kids. Fat kids drink it. Okay? So there's a problem here. Okay, and we're going to show you how that works. Okay, so xylulose 5-phosphate, just to show you. So here's, if you take a rat and you glycogen deplete them by making them run on an exercise wheel, okay, and then you refeed them with starch or with sucrose, the xylulose 5-phosphate goes way up with the sucrose. Okay? So you get more xylulose 5-phosphate through this pathway here, going over here. So why do we care about xylulose 5-phosphate? Well, here's why. Because it stimulates this guy over here called PP2A, which then activates this transcription factor here, carbohydrate response element binding protein, which then activates what 3 enzymes? New fat making, right? De novo lipogenesis. So here's the citrate, right? We got lots of that. And here we've got acyl-CoA, which is the way into fat, okay, which then gets packaged, with to the VLDL, and now you've got the dyslipidemia of obesity, of fructose consumption, which has been known for many years. So here's normal medical students, if you can call them normal. Okay? Taking in a glucose load, notice almost none of it ends up as fat. Taking in a fructose load, same number of calories, 30% of it ends up as fat. So when you consume fructose, you're not consuming a carbohydrate, you're consuming fat. So everybody talks about a high-fat diet. Well, a high-sugar diet is a high-fat diet. That's the point. That's exactly the point. Okay? This is a study where they gave acute administration of fructose, and you can see the triglycerides going up compared to the control. Okay, serum triglyceride right there. Here's normal medical students again, 6 days of high fructose feeding. Triglycerides doubled. De novo lipogenesis went up 5 times higher. And here's free fatty acids, which then cause insulin resistance, doubled. Okay, 6 days. So, here's the dyslipidemia of fructose consumption. We're not done. Some of the fat won't make it out of the liver, just like with ethanol, and now you've got a lipid droplet, so now you've got this non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. So this is work that we did in our clinic, okay, looking at sugar-sweetened beverage consumption against the liver enzyme marker ALT, alanine aminotransferase, which tells you about fatty liver. And sure enough, here's sugar-sweetened beverages against ALT, and you can see a nice linear relationship in Caucasians. African Americans, it's a different relationship, and that's a whole nother story all by itself. Okay? So there's the lipid droplet of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Some of it will come out as free fatty acids and populate the muscle. We'll also tell the insulin to go up higher. Remember that JUNK1? So here's what JUNK1 does. So the acyl-CoA and the fructose can all activate JUNK1. And what JUNK1 does is, remember when we use glucose, this IRS became tyrosine IRS1, and that was good. Remember that? Well, JUNK1, what it does is it serine phosphorylates IRS1. And serine IRS1 is inactive. So now the insulin can't even do its job in the liver. So now you have liver insulin resistance as well. That's going to make the pancreas work that much harder, generating higher insulin levels, which raise your blood pressure even further, cause further fat making, cause more energy to go into your fat cell. There's your obesity. Okay? And finally, our research has shown that the higher the insulin goes, the less well your brain can see its leptin. And so there you've got continued consumption because your brain thinks it's starving. And it's been shown in many different ways that fructose consumption changes the way your brain recognizes energy, all in a negative fashion, so that you basically think you're starving. Your brain gets the signal that you're starving, even though your fat cells are generating a signal that says, hey, I'm full like all get out. Okay? So this just shows you how it goes. So the high insulin generates the obesity because this is that, remember that first law of thermodynamics, the biochemical force generating the energy storage as the primary phenomenon, remember? If you're going to store it and you expect to burn it, then you're going to have to eat it. So here's the store it. Normally, that would make leptin, and the leptin should feed back and turn everything off. But it doesn't because the insulin gets in the way, and the high-fat diet gets in the way. Also, the hyperinsulinemia stops the leptin from acting on that nucleus accumbens, and so you get an increased reward signal. So that continues your appetite, continues more fructose, more carbohydrate, generating more insulin resistance, and you can see you generate a vicious cycle of consumption and disease, and no stopping. So here we are. Hypertension, inflammation, hepatic insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, dyslipidemia, muscle insulin resistance, obesity, and continued consumption. Looks like metabolic syndrome to me. So here are the phenomena associated with chronic ethanol exposure. Hematologic disorders, electrolyte abnormalities, hypertension, cardiac dilatation, cardiomyopathy, dyslipidemia, pancreatitis, malnutrition, obesity, hepatic dysfunction, that's alcoholic steatohepatitis, fetal alcohol syndrome, and addiction. Here's fructose. 8 out of 12. Why? Because they do the same thing. Because they're metabolized the same way. Because they are the same. They come from the same place, right? How do you make ethanol? Naturally. Right. You ferment sugar. Hasn't changed because it has all the same properties, because it's basically taken care of by the liver in exactly the same way and for the same reason. Because sugar and ethanol are the same. Every which way you turn. So here's our clinic intervention. This is what we do in our clinic. Okay? It's as simple as you can imagine. We write this on the back of a matchbook. Okay? I mean, it's just as simple as you can make it. We have 4 things we teach the kids to do, and the parents. Get rid of every sugared liquid in the house, bar none. Only water and milk. Okay? There is no such thing as a good sugar beverage, period. Eat your carbohydrate with fiber. Why? Because fiber is good. Fiber is supposed to be an essential nutrient. And we can talk later, if you want, after the cameras turn off, as to why fiber is not an essential nutrient. Because the government doesn't want it to be. Okay, because then they couldn't sell food abroad. Wait 20 minutes for second portions, okay, to get that satiety signal. And finally, buy your screen time minute for minute with physical activity. That's the hardest one to do. Okay? So if you play for half an hour, you can watch TV for half an hour. You want to watch TV for an hour, play for an hour. That one's a hard one. But anyway, we follow our patients every 3 months. So here's my question. Does it work? What do you think? Yeah, it works. Okay? So this is BMI Z-score, time from initial visit. It works. But we were interested in what made it work and what made it didn't work. So we did a multivariate linear regression analysis, right? The thing that made it not work, sugared beverage consumption. The more sugar beverages the patients drank at baseline, the less well the lifestyle intervention worked, for all the reasons I just showed you. Okay? So, why is exercise important in obesity? Because it burns calories? Come on. 20 minutes of jogging is 1 chocolate chip cookie. You can't do it. Are you joking me? So why is exercise important? I'll tell you why. Here's why. Number 1, it improves that skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity, because your insulin actually works better at your muscle, okay, which then brings your insulin levels down, which is good for you. Number 2, it's your endogenous stress reducer. It's the single thing that actually stress reduces. And if you stress reduce, what do you think your appetite does? Goes down. Because stress and obesity go hand in hand, right? For all sorts of reasons which are beyond the scope of this lecture today, but we can talk about in the question period if you want. And then finally, remember that de novo lipogenesis? Remember those 3 nasty enzymes? Okay? What if you burned the stuff off before you made the fat? That's what exercise does, because it makes that TCA cycle run faster, so you don't get the citrate leaving the mitochondria, so it doesn't get turned into fat, so it doesn't precipitate and cause all the problems you just saw. That's what they mean by a higher metabolism, yes. Okay? But it has nothing to do with burning of calories. That is the stupidest reason that I've ever heard of for exercise. You got to be joking me. Okay? You can't do it. I mean, 1 Big Mac, you know, and you've got to, mountain bike for 10 hours. Are you joking? Okay, so why is fiber important in obesity? So this is my motto in clinic. When God made the poison, he packaged it with the antidote. Okay? Because fructose is a poison. I think I've hopefully shown you that. Okay? But wherever there's fructose in nature, there's way more fiber. Do you ever see a piece of sugar cane? It's a stick. Right? You can't even chew the damn thing, right? You got to suck the stuff out like that, right? I mean, how many calories do you think you're going to get out of a piece of sugar cane? Okay? They actually did studies on the sugar plantations back in the early 1900s. Okay? All of the workers were healthy and lived longer than the sugar executives who got the processed product. How about that? Wonder why. Okay? So, eat your carbohydrate with fiber. That's why we say that. That includes sugar. That's why fruit's okay. Because number one, it limits how much fructose you're going to take in. And number two, it gives you an essential nutrient which you needed in the first place. And you get some micronutrients along with it so that you actually can, your liver works healthier. So here's what fiber does. Number one, it reduces the rate of intestinal carbohydrate absorption. Okay? Now, sometimes that's bad. I'll tell you when that's bad. Okay? You know when that's bad? That's bad when you're at a formal function. Because what happens if you reduce the rate of carbohydrate absorption in your gut? The bacteria get to it. Okay? So as far as I'm concerned, in life you've got two choices. It's either fat or fart. It increases the speed of transit of the intestinal contents to the ileum. Okay? And that raises this hormone over here called PYY, which goes to your brain and tells you the meal's over. That's your satiety signal. So when you add fiber to your diet, you actually get your satiety signal sooner because the food moves through faster. And then finally, it also inhibits the absorption of some free fatty acids all the way to the colon, and then those get chopped up into little itty-bitty fragments called short-chain fatty acids, and those actually suppress insulin as opposed to long-chain fatty acids which stimulate insulin. So there are a whole bunch of reasons why fiber is good. Anybody ever heard of the Paleolithic diet? Okay? Go home and read up on it on the internet. Okay? The Paleolithic diet. Basically, if you eat everything as it came out of the ground raw, okay, with no cooking, okay, you would cure diabetes on a dime. Okay? It takes about a week. Okay? Because you're getting that 100 to 300 grams of fiber I mentioned before. That's why. Because fiber is good for you. Okay? And the more the better.
Type 2.
Type 2, right, type 2, not type 1. Type 1. I stand corrected, type 2. Okay? Okay. Now, for some fun. Okay, that's the end of the biochemistry. Whew. How'd I do? I told you I'd get you through it. Okay.